Hello world, welcome to my second attempt for today's climate change emergency protest. This is, let's see, number 163. It's January 21st, 2022. Next week will be protest number 164 on January 28th, 2022. And the reason why I'm redoing it is because I was outside by this beautiful tree that is over 300 years old. But the wind was too much for the broadcast, so I'm redoing it. I don't want to have to do that because it's hard to duplicate. But I'll try here, and I'm inside my car because right now the wind chill is minus 17 Celsius, and the air temperature is 17 degrees Fahrenheit outside. So the wind chill in Fahrenheit is 1 degree. So it was windy, and the broadcast was unlistenable. So I'll redo it here. So the Doomsday Clock people came out with their new broadcast, their new prediction, and they say it's 100 seconds until midnight. In reality, I believe that it's 5 minutes past midnight. There is a 10 to 30 year delay between carbon dioxide and temperature catching up, and I don't think they factored that in. They could not have, and keep the 100 seconds to midnight idea for the clock for the last 3 years. Climate change has gotten much, much worse. And by next year, it'll be much, much, much worse. And by 2023, it's going to be hell on earth, I think. So, is the Doomsday Clock irrelevant? Are the people irrelevant? No, because back in the 1980s, 1982, there's a nuclear protest rally we had in Central Park. I drove by myself up to New York City from Gettysburg, and engaged in that protest. There were over 1 million people back then in Central Park in New York. And what happened as a result of that is Ronald Reagan and Gorbachev came to the idea that that they need to reduce nuclear weapons. People were getting up in arms about it, and it was essentially a suicide run. They just kept making more and more nuclear weapons and staring at each other, just waiting to push the button. And no one wins in a nuclear war. Everybody loses. You can blow up a bomb here, but it affects everyone worldwide eventually. So what I'm trying to get at is that protests do work. India, for example, when they got their independence, that was led by Gandhi back in the 1940s. You had the USA civil rights actions and protests by Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and other people. And you had the USA in the world with the new anti-nuclear protests. So protests do work. People need to get out and actually do it, though, in order for them to work. And you can't just do a one and done and then sit back for 5 years and do another one. You need to get out there weekly, if not daily, and make your voice known one way or another, whether it's protests or broadcast. So the Thwaites Glacier down in Antarctica represents 2 feet of sea level rise. Right now, scientists are predicting it's fracturing like heck, and scientists are predicting that it's going to be 1 to 5 years till it totally fractures apart. And that represents 2 feet of sea level rise, as I said. It uncorks a bottle, though, for other glaciers being held back in West Antarctica, and then they'll start slipping faster and faster into the ocean. So it's a feedback loop that without that cork in the bottle, it just starts accelerating everything else even faster. So the results of 2 feet of sea level rise could end up being 100 nuclear facilities out of the 400 around the world are actually on the coast. Military bases around the world, all Navy bases, any country, will be profoundly affected. You have entire cities that are going to be affected that are at sea level. Airports are often just above sea level. You have Bangladesh, for example, is a whole country, has 160-some million people in it, and they are in jeopardy if sea level goes up 2 feet. You also have the major deltas of the world. You have the Mississippi Delta, you have the Mekong, all sorts of deltas that are vulnerable to sea level rise. That they'll go up that river delta however far. And those areas tend to be flat, so 2 extra feet will cause some severe problems. You've also permafrost being affected by sea level rise. The intrusion of warmer water into the permafrost causes it to melt even faster. With 2 feet of sea level rise, you end up with a Category 5 hurricane becoming commonplace. There's a lot more to work with for the hurricanes. You end up with ghost forests, where saltwater intrusion into everything, that can affect the forests of the world. You end up with billions of people basically being affected by 2 feet of sea level rise. So another subject is the Mirror Project. There are a lot of scientists and people that I respect that fully believe that the Mirror Project, which is mirroring for Earth energy rebalancing, something like that. You know, it looks on the surface really good. You know, it's bounce some light from the sun back towards out into space and don't let it hit the Earth. You know, what could go wrong with that? Any massive geoengineering project in the atmosphere, hey, what could go wrong? Well, Newton's third law says every action has an equal and opposite reaction, and that's what the Earth does usually. It's a rebalancing thing. It's a, you know, it has the ability somehow to put itself back in back in the original state that it wanted to be in until it's profoundly affected. So everything affects everything else. You end up with less sun with these projects, which could affect phytoplankton and plants of the world by not being able to produce photosynthesis, and seagrasses and kelp forests and things like that. You end up with trees dying because they don't get as much light. You end up with farm situation. What are you going to do to grow your food? You know, with less light. Weather patterns change. You end up with more monsoons, less monsoons, more drought, more floods, who knows what. But it's a horrible solution with potential of actually speeding up extinction rather than reducing it. And you have to look at who's pushing this. Yes, some scientists who I really admire and professors are behind it and like the idea of geoengineering. But in reality, it's the billionaires that are controlling the narrative, as well as politicians, and you know, the oil companies, that I suspect feel that they can put off having to deal with climate change for more and more length of time, and then it'll be someone else's problem later on after they're gone. So it's not a good idea in my mind. We need technology, but we also need to do, you know, some real logical thinking as to what can happen, what can go wrong if we start doing this. So Antarctica, back to Antarctica, Thwaites Glacier and other glaciers. You know, Antarctica has, just in West Antarctica itself, has 138 volcanoes in West Antarctica. 138. And they don't even know how many volcanoes are throughout Antarctica. So my theory that I proposed before, and evidently there was some paper out in 2016 that had the same idea, but my theory was that the weight of the glaciers, once they're unweighted by losing their mass and it goes into the ocean, the weight of that transfer can affect volcanoes, plate tectonics, other things like that. Well, if you shift this over and extrapolate to West Antarctica, if you have all these volcanoes that have less weight on them due to glacier melt, the land is going to change there. It's going to start rebounding, and you're going to end up with more and more volcanoes, and active ones at that. And you're going to have volcanoes erupting where they didn't have volcanoes before. So more ice melt can potentially lead to more volcanoes. More volcanoes can lead to less ice, which is less pressure on the other places that could have volcanoes, as well as shifting of plate tectonics there as well. And you end up with more volcanoes. It's a feedback loop that keeps going. So West Antarctica represents 16 feet of potential sea level rise. Thwaites Glacier is 2 feet of sea level rise. Within that is West Antarctica, and you know, you have 16 feet of potential sea level rise. And then you have all the Antarctic that can represent almost 230 feet of potential sea level rise. So we're building for a world of hurt because there's a 10 to 30 year delay between temperature catching up to CO2 levels. And right now we have baked in basically 3 degrees to 4 degrees Celsius of temperature rise, as well as somewhere around 90 feet of sea level rise. It just hasn't happened yet. And that's what the problem I have with Doomsday Clock, because they're not looking into the future. They're looking to the now. And right now is not an answer when you're dealing with climate change. You actually have to have forethought and look, hey, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, this is going to happen. And your politicians that say by 2030, we're going to get rid of half of the CO2 in the atmosphere or whatever, or cut our emissions in half. That ain't good enough. Sorry, we're so past the point of no return right now. We need to do something drastic in a hurry right now, not 2030, not 2050, not 2070. So these politicians that are saying such things don't know the situation. And the media lack of coverage, they don't know the situation, or they don't want to know the situation because they're backed by fossil fuel companies or some weird thing going on with the politicians, whether they're lizard people or whether they're getting money from the corporations, but they have children. So something's not making sense in this whole thing. And if you can figure out what the heck's going on with the politicians of the world, let me know. They can't all be wimpy and just worried about running for re-election and making money. Something weird is going on, and none of this is making any sense. We have pushed ourselves over the extinction cliff, and now we have to grapple just to climb back up to extinction and doomsday. So, we're 5 minutes past midnight as far as I am concerned about that. So it comes down to this. The politicians needs to do the basic thing, which is get rid of oil subsidies to the oil and fossil fuel companies. We need to have actual action by the governments and politicians of the world, not some sort of promise that by 2030 we're going to do this. When they're no longer in office, they no longer have skin in the game, and they don't care at that point. So this is just placation. These are just words. Existential threat means existential, like life-threatening immediate action, like a tiger's around your throat. That's an existential threat. Existential threat does not mean 2030, 2050, 2070 and stuff like that. If you're voting for politicians that don't understand this, which is everybody, then you're voting for the wrong people. You need to, regardless if your party's going to win or lose, is vote for the right people. Whether you're Republican in this country or Democrat, it doesn't matter. You need to find people that actually know what they're talking about and can actually be well versed in climate change. This idea of the Russian-American standoff in Ukraine is ridiculous. These two bumbling, buffoonish countries don't know what's going on in the real world, like we're all going to die. Meanwhile, they're moving around decks or chairs on the Titanic and deciding where to sit. This is ridiculous what's happening. These are crimes against humanity. Military action and things against each other are crimes against humanity at this point. We're not focusing as a world government, not world government because everyone gets scared of that. We're not focusing on ourselves as being all connected to each other and the planet ecological system as well. So the only thing that really works is going to be getting media involved, getting politicians to get involved to the point that they're actually informed and not scared to talk about climate change. We need protests and broadcasts like this. Please do your broadcasts and feel free to post them on my page. If I don't like it, I'll take it off, but feel free to protest your broadcasts on this page as well. So I recommend you go to Environmental Coffee House on YouTube, as well as looking up the word climate change on YouTube. And if you have other information you need to gather, my Facebook page is a good place to start. Just go right down this page here, and there's tons of information on there. So next week will be number 164. That'll be on January 28th, 2022. And I'm glad the broadcast worked a little better. Hopefully right now. I'll see you later. Bye.